Hello. Get your official products such as this marvelous t-shirt that I'm wearing or this great coffee mug that I'm drinking out of and many other products with the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis logo at https://www.zazzle.com/store/a-stuff-store and make sure you get your 15% discount today. Hello. Welcome to the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show.
Welcome to a podcast show about stuff. It's the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. Here's your host, Stephen Davis.
Hello. My name is Stephen Davis, and I'm the host of the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. My guest, Ishmael Reed, is an American poet, novelist, essayist, songwriter, composer, playwright, editor, and a publisher known for his satirical works challenging the American political culture. His best-known work is Mumbo Jumbo, a 1972 release sprawling and unorthodox novel set in the 1920s. Hello, Ishmael. How are you doing today? Hello, how are you?
How you doing? We're doing very well. So far, we've escaped the fires.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's horrible out there. It's horrible out there. And having come to Los Angeles so much, I can't imagine. I've been in one of those fires in Los Angeles in terms of traveling to Las Vegas right after it happened and the smoke is going and everything else. But I just can't imagine being in a house, having a house and having it destroyed and having your life destroyed for a certain period of time. So you all be careful out there. Now, I usually always start from the very beginning. And my first question to you is, where were you born at?
I was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, 1938.
Chattanooga, Tennessee. And do you remember much about, did you grow up in Chattanooga so that you remember a whole lot about it?
We left for the North when I was about 4 years old, but we would return during the summer. So I'm having great memories. As a matter of fact, the mayor of Chattanooga has invited me to come down there in March. And they're making me the, the poet laureate emeritus or something like that.
Fantastic.
That's ironic because we couldn't wait to get out of there. I mean, we're like those Ukrainians, man. We're on the bus, on the railroad station, man, just going to freedom in the North. And, the whole migration thing.
Tell me about your parents. Let's talk about your parents. First, your mother.
My mother was very militant, but was polite with it. And she could talk and express herself. And she organized 2 strikes that benefited Black women without union help. And I think that all of us, we have some kind of organizing gene, because when I was a kid, I was organizing clubs and YMCA organizations and things like that. And the legend is that, according to my grandmother, her father, Marion Shaw Coleman, was an Irish American, or maybe biracial, who was run out of Chattanooga because he tried to organize the pipe workers.
Oh, really?
Now, my mother has a different story. She said he looked like a white man, but he ran away with a church woman. So I don't know between the two. I don't know which one is true, but I think my grandmother's that was her father, so she probably has better idea what happened.
Do you, on your mother's side, were you familiar with your grandmother and the great grandmother? And do you know some of the history in terms of your family?
I'm learning more because I joined ancestry.com and got my DNA and everything. According to my DNA, I'm a Nigerian American. Majority of my DNA equipment is Nigerian. And I told a young woman, a Nigerian writer, who edited 2 volumes of Nigerian writers for us. First was 20 new poets from Nigeria, and the second was 16 short stories by Nigerian women. And I said, I found out that I'm probably a Nigerian American, and so maybe we have relatives. She didn't answer me.
I actually have Nigerian, and there's a mixture of different African cultures from the south all the way up to the north of it. But I also have a European blood also.
Yes, all
And
of us do. Most of us do.
yes, but I actually found on both sides of my parents the white relatives from back in 1600 and 1500 who lived in Germany or lived in England and such. It's eye-opening in terms of what is accomplishable now with technology.
Yeah. Joel Williamson, in his book, The Crucible of Race, said that there was so much race mixing that we are part of a new sort of like race. And that up until the 1850s, America of that period looked like Brazil. So this whole thing about white supremacy is probably something new. I just read a biography of one of the jazz musicians in New Orleans who said that 1889 is when Jim Crow arrived in New Orleans.
Mhm. It arrived a little bit earlier in where my ancestors were from in terms of South Carolina. And I even trace back to I have a great grandmother that was born in Angola. We all have that type of history. Your father, how was
My natural father I never met him, but I get along with my that part of my family very well. They are
Mhm.
lawyers, and one is a pediatrician who has a syndicated show. The side of my family is the working class part. And so I'm in between 2 families, which makes me very fortunate. The thing is that there's certain, you get so close to the inner workings, and then you're forbidden from going any further. But they're all workaholics. I'm considered the bohemian.
it seems like you've done
Yeah,
a lot.
when I
You got
retired, when I retired from teaching 35 years at the University of California, Berkeley, I said the only reason I'm having a retirement party is to convince my mother I haven't been goofing off for 35 years. She said, Ishmael, we work with our hands. What do you just?
Oh, it's part of that organizing and stuff because you ever notice if you're a go-getter, you just come up with ideas and then
Right,
you sell them to
right.
people to help you do it.
Well, I think it's more difficult on the East Coast than it is out here. It's easier, no, more difficult in the sense that we don't have any patrons out here. People out here don't care how sensitive and gifted you are. You remember that song "Young, Gifted, and Black"?
Yes, Nina
Well,
Simone.
that was like Manhattan in the 1960s when we were all writing there and hanging out and partying. But out here, you have the blacks who rode with the Pony Express and cowboys, and there's even a house that still exists in Oakland that belonged to a whaler.
Hmm.
You had blacks out here hunting down whales, and it's just so you have to start from scratch. Fortunately, we've been able to build 2 foundations that really benefit writers, Hispanic, Black, whatever. And one is almost 50 years old. I founded it in 1976. And now we have some of the biggest, most famous writers on the board of directors, like Pulitzer Prize winners, 3 former U.S. poet laureates, book winner of the Booker Prize, Marlon James. And we are very competitive with those organizations on the East Coast. For the first time, the West Coast we have something called the Pacific Rim out here.
Hmm.
I've written an article about it. I'm trying to get it published, but there's a renaissance of Black writers out here. which is not unprecedented because I learned that Wallace Thurman and Anna Bontemps were in Los Angeles. And Chester Himes was the great detective novelist, lived in my house here for a summer. His book, If He Hollers, man, that's a brutal book, man, about racism in the automobile industry during the 1940s. Oh my goodness. It's considered the best Los Angeles novel. So we do have a tradition out here, but it's expanding with a younger generation. So these are Black Pacific Rim writers stretching from Hawaii to Seattle to Los Angeles.
Just a quick note. Do you know Woody King?
Yeah,
I know he I remember him talking about you. Yeah,
yeah,
Woody's buddy, my buddy.
yeah. He's good. He's done a lot for theater in this country.
Yes, he has. He has. He has.
Against all odds, I could imagine what you'd have to go through to be a producer in New York. I can't imagine. It's got to be really brutal. It's got to be really brutal. But I see Woody got the Delco Awards. We received a number of Delco Awards, even for costuming for the
I
film.
just passed the Delco Award.
Not the most recent one, but before that, Rome Neal, our director, he's been directing my plays since the 90s. He directed one play called Mother Hubbard, which finally was produced in China. And my wife directed it. Carla Blank directed it in China.
Hmm.
But it's about feminists taking over California and ordering all the men to leave the state.
Hmm.
And the ones who don't leave in time, they put in camps. Had a lot of fun with that one.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Mary Wilson of Supremes was performing at the Carlisle Hotel, and she came down to see a performance and requested a role. And she learned her lines over the weekend, man. It's amazing.
Well, I must have seen you or met you before. Were you at that Adolco Award where Mary Wilson was there?
No, I wasn't, but I heard,
Oh,
heard
okay.
she
I was there when she was there.
yeah, she
And as a
mentioned
matter
she
of
was
fact, I went to the after party that they had. I sat next to her.
I'd met them when they were really beginning to gain popularity.
Hmm.
So they're all Florence Kennedy was their lawyer. So they had a reception at Florence Kennedy's house, and they were there, and I was talking to them. I was bragging on myself and everything, and next thing I know, they gone.
Now
So
tell
that's
me, you moved to
Buffalo.
Buffalo, okay, home
Buffalo.
of Frankie Crocker
I knew
and
Frankie Crocker.
Imhotep Gary Bird.
Yeah, I knew Frankie Crocker. I saw him in 1978 when I covered the Muhammad Ali Spinks fight in New Orleans.
Uh,
He had, boy, he had an entourage. He looked like he's had a harem, man. All these women he brought down. And I got a picture with him. It's amazing. But
yes.
he was a,
So tell me, number one, you talk about being glad to get the hell out of Chattanooga at that particular time. How did you feel when you moved to Buffalo, or you were just too young to have any feelings? It was just something that was part of the deal.
I lived with my cousins until my mother and my stepfather could get situated in the projects. And I lived on Potter Street, which later I found was a Black historic zone where a number of the leading personalities in the Black community lived, including Reverend Jesse Nash. Uh, Jesse Nash was the minister at the Michigan Avenue Baptist Church, which was a refuge for the fugitive slaves before they went over to Canada.
Mhm.
Buffalo was the last stop, and there are pews where they hid. And that's a landmark now, the Michigan Avenue Baptist Church. And I went to St. Luke's AME Zion Church, which was Harriet Tubman's church, and which is called the Freedom Church. I didn't know all this until I left Buffalo because we were fashioned in our education to be Anglo, what they call Anglo mainstream.
Mhm.
There was very little about Black literature or history. So I didn't learn how important Buffalo was, like the Niagara movement, all these organizations that happened there. It was a big anti-slavery spot, And William Wells Brown, one of the first African-American novelists, he wrote I think 1854, still in print, about Sally Hemings, and which was very subversive. We got a very subversive tradition, which is why they're trying to suppress it now, because blacks are always the canaries in the coal mine. And he lived in Buffalo, and now all of a sudden there's a recognition of that. But we had to really learn our history in the streets. That was before ethnic studies. I remember I took J. Rogers' book to school when I was a kid, and I challenged the teacher to explain why we weren't hearing about all these great achievements of black people, and she just dismissed it because we have people who taught us were suburban women who didn't have a clue about how to teach black kids. But I had mentors who were white. Among my mentors were two white women and white men. But I was most successful in a class that was conducted by a black woman in grammar school. And later, by coincidence, she married Reverend Nash's son. So they're part of the aristocracy. As a matter of fact, there's a museum dedicated to him. So that was part of the aristocracy. But this woman, when she was a young woman, and she gave me tickets to the concerts, and I used to play the violin, and she had me come in and play. But the white women teachers were really hard on me. I was ashamed to take my report card home because they'd have discipline and all that. That was my experience there. But I want to talk about two of my mentors. One was a Jewish drugstore owner who came to the United States from Ukraine when he's 11 years old. And it's because of him that you have Walgreens, Seabed. He was the one who founded the modern department store chain. His name was Carl Prater. He encouraged me, said, you speak up and you know all these things. And I was following the McCarthy hearings and all that kind of stuff. I was all in the current events and all that. And I was working at the drugstore. This is my first job. And I came out and a car pulls up and there's this black man with a Stetson hat. That should have been a hint. And it was the great A.J. Smitherman, who was the hero of the Tulsa 1921 uprising. Now, people see the documentaries that they have now don't tell a story. Matter of fact, I had his granddaughter, great-granddaughter in the house here, Raven, and the family is still trying to get compensated by Tulsa for what they did. They burned down his publishing company, burned down his house. He fled to Boston. The Oklahoma authorities tried to get him for sedition or riling up black people, uppity, right? And then Boston refused to extradite him. Then he moved to Buffalo. I didn't know any of those things until I left Buffalo, because he was in Buffalo because he could go to Canada in case. But this is a great man. As a matter of fact, President Biden mentioned him I think last year, the year before last, one down in Tulsa. He believed in armed resistance. So he and these World War I veterans would go and interrupt lynchings. And he interrupted a lynching unarmed because he threatened the lynchers with a briefcase. He said he had a bomb in it. But that was what happened in Tulsa. It wasn't the fact that these white mobs just ran over black people, but he left a poem, which I published, where he talks about what happened when these armed black soldiers, veterans from World War I, went down to interrupt the lynching. This kid, Roland, Diamond Dick Roland or whatever, was accused of assaulting a white girl. And what happened was he bumped into her on the elevator and she screamed. And she told the police that it was inadvertent. She said it was an accident. No, the media, which is always, even to this day, riding up mobs against black people, like they're blaming the mayor of Los Angeles for setting that fire. That's the line I'm getting from the media. But they have always been the enemy. And so the Tulsa paper said there's going to be a lynching tonight. Nobody even thought about a lynching. And so all these white mobs, they gathered in front of the police station where they were holding this kid. And Smitherman encourage all these people, these guys, to go down there and assist the sheriff. And one of these mob members tried to take a gun away from one of the World War I veterans, and it was on. Initially, the black veterans drew casualties. You don't hear about that. They fought back. They resisted, right? And so the entire weight of the state had to be thrown against, including a attack from the air. The Black Wall Street, the entire weight of the state had to be thrown against them to get that going. And 300 people died, but they saw Smitherman and the operator of the hotel, who were leading citizens of Black Wall Street, as the perpetrators of rising up black people, and they pursued them. But he recently got clemency a few years ago, and maybe an apology. But he was a sad person, and they tried to break him, and they did not succeed in breaking him. And after he died, a young man named Joe Walker and I ran the paper.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I met Malcolm X, because we had a radio show. And it was Malcolm X who changed my mind, or not, introduced me to Black history. Because he was at a prison where they had 2,000 books. Some patron had donated 2,000 books to this prison, and I think he probably read all of them. He's one of two geniuses I met in my life. And people talk about Black history, but he knew Western literature. You don't hear about that, because I wrote a poem I dedicated to him. It was so bad, I threw it away. But he was very charitable. And he said it reminds him of Virgil and Dante. So he knew the Western canon also.
Okay. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but I still want to come up your life in terms of you're in Buffalo. Do you remember the elementary school you went to?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was it?
I went to a school where the the white teacher slapped me so hard I saw stars.
Oh boy.
That was in I used to get beat up. It was women. Because I was considered a mischievous person. And so I'd get slapped around and all that. But anyway, she slapped me so hard. Then I went to a ghetto school. My mother took me out of that school. And I just had a hard time with these teachers until her name was Hortense Butts then. Hortense Nash. She's the one who said I had some kind of future ahead for me and encouraged me.
And that is so important that people know that children need mentors.
Mm-hmm.
They need people to guide them, not tell them what to do, because in the end that you got to do what you do, but to be able to guide them so that some of the mistakes that we've made, that we can impart a little bit of wisdom onto them in terms of moving forward. It's sad to see from my point of view, this is strictly my point of view, that a lot of the gains that were made during this particular period of time have a chance of it's already been starting to lose those gains, those hard fought gains. And it's because we, in some ways, think that we have made it and we don't have to be vigilant anymore.
No, 40% of Black people live in poverty. It's benefited a sort of class. It's benefited the middle, Martin Luther King's class. Let's face it, the middle class has made advances, but their success is always tentative, because they can always be relieved of their assets through trickery.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And that happened so much particularly right after 1876.
absolutely.
Every Black family in America has a story about how some land was taken from them.
Oh yeah, thousands of acres. And you had the Freedmen's Savings Bank. Now, people are really amazed when they hear about the Freedmen's Savings Bank, established in 1865, that Black people, even during the period of slavery, had accumulated what in today's terms would be $1 billion. because they come from marketplace cultures. If you go to Nigeria, everybody's hustling. Everybody's hustling, man. There's no safety net. Like Haiti too, there's no safety net. So they had accumulated $1 billion, which is amazing. It's $50, $70 million they put in this bank. The government guaranteed, encouraged them to put the money in the bank and guaranteed these savings. The bank failed because missionaries were running it and they didn't know what they were doing. And as in today's banking system, white people got most of the mortgage. As a matter of fact, Fred Douglass said it was the black man's cow, but the white man's milk. And he became president of the bank, and they blamed its failure on him. But the thing went bankrupt, and the government reneged on its promise to guarantee the savings, and people got wiped out. So that's why even in places like Hollywood, black people keep their money in mattresses. And a friend of mine died, and thousands of dollars he had put in cans and all of it. And so when the sheriffs went in, they took that money. And we do provide a Marshall Plan for the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
All the money, the police take this money from drug dealers. And I live in a black ghetto here. Up until now, it was a black ghetto. And police would come out here and ask for their drug dealers to give them money. They just really bold about it. And I wrote about it. And the newspaper asked the police department about it, and they refused to say anything about it. But underground economy is making the suburbs rich because of graft and corrupt. Now, you don't hear about that from all these people are scolding black people. Like, I can mention some names who don't know anything about economics. That's what they have in common. But they're all saying, why don't they? You got some black people that they let on TV and in the newspaper saying, well, why don't they pull themselves up by their bootstraps? The capitalist system has always been hostile to black people. First, they were assets. And then when they were so-called when they emancipated themselves, and Du Bois, I think, is right. It was a general strike that brought down the South. Black people stopped working. It was work slowed down. And you can read these diaries. They're not coming to work, and they blah blah. You read these diaries of the Civil War. So these people don't know anything about economics, and if they did, they would know that there's always been a drive by the capitalist system to deprive black people of their assets.
Did you go to a specific junior high school during that particular period of time?
I wasted my time in one high school because I was trying to impress this teacher who beat me up. You always thought maybe it's my fault.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a teacher who hated me because she was overruled by the principal of the school,
Mm-hmm.
who I was her favorite, the principal. Maybe but the principal would have me do the auditorium assembly things I'd be leading in. And this teacher said, she'd come in, you think you the whole show, blah, 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 blah. And just be signifying on me. And so she got an excuse to push me around when I beat up her teacher's pet. The kid insulted me. If you're from the South, don't step on my blue suede shoes, right? Any little thing. As a matter of fact, one guy said we learned that from the Scots Irish.
Mm-hmm.
People knew, like, some little incident sets you off, right? So we had a little fist fight, and the guy came in there the next day with his mother, what you call in basketball a flop, right? In his arms, that sling. So the teacher took me into a room after school, started shoving me around and punching me and stuff. And I knew enough at that time to know if I struck back, I'd be into prison. They put me in the criminal justice system. So I just took it. I didn't tell my parents about it because they always took the authority side because they were young people and they came from the South, and they, in a way, they were very deferential toward white people, at least because whites, there have been whites who've been very good to them. Let's put it that way. My mother's Southern strategy was that good white people would protect you from the evil ones. That was her Southern strategy, and it worked for her. And she carried that idea on to Buffalo, New York. So when it was time for my younger brothers to be ensnared in the criminal justice system, which is a ritual that all young black kids have to go through, my mother told the cops who had been assigned to that to doing that she worked for Judge Sedita. And they backed off because Judge Sedita was the brother of the mayor of the most powerful Italian American family in town. And so they backed off. So she used the good white folks against the evil ones.
But how did, during this particular period of time and into high school, how did it affect you as a person in terms of your thought process, in terms of what you would decide to do later on?
Was the first one to publish me in a newspaper. I was 16. So I was in print when I was 16. And about that time, when I was in high school, I was much more successful. This teacher beat me up, said, you should be a tech man. That's the highest thing. So I went to this technical school and I had no aptitude for it. I transferred to a school for general education, where general education was taught, and I succeeded. What happened to me is I went to Paris and it changed my mind about a lot of things. I asked people from the YMCA, Black YMCA, which was the architect of the Black YMCA was John Brent, the great Black architect. They took up their money, made a collection, and sent 3 people to Paris. I was one of them because I was Mr. YMCA. I'd be down there. And for the YMCA convention in Paris, right? And they put us up at the Sorbonne, not the Sorbonne, but the City University outside of Paris, where these students from the Sorbonne lived in these dorms. I met these Black students from Africa. And I said, wait a minute, I thought these people had bones in their noses and lions, all the stuff that we're still taught here. We're still taught here. New York Times is awful on Africa. They're back there with Edward Rice Burroughs, tires of New York Times. They're terrible in Africa. I said, what's going on here? And these Africans didn't fit the image of Africans I read in textbooks in school. And the African ballet, they had signs all over Paris where the African ballet was performing and all that. I came back, I said, I dropped out of high school. That was such a cultural shock. I decided they're lying about this. What else are they lying about? I just didn't, and I still don't. That's why I do these plays, for example, The Haunting of Lin-Manuel Miranda, where he tries to honor and praise his slaveholder, Alexander Hamilton. That comes out of that distrust of the way history is taught here. And my play, I think we spent about 30, maybe $40,000 to this $1 billion gargantuan thing. We're following him all over the world. So everywhere, like in New Zealand, where it opens up, I was on the front page. Zealand, right? China, all over. I bet they tired of us. But that was the first disillusionment I had with the way culture is represented, not only at the high school level, but at places like Harvard and Yale, where I've taught. And maybe that's why so many of these people, these MAGA people and militia people, are graduating from those schools. Same curriculum. The Western civilization is the best. Some guy in the Huffington Post said, Huffington Post, yes, I'm going to say it. White men are responsible for the great ideas of mankind. He's forgetting about algebra. That didn't come out of Europe. He's forgetting about a whole lot of stuff. That was when I changed my mind about history, and Malcolm X reinforced that when I met him, I said, this moderator of the show said, we're going to talk about Black history. And I was really all smart aleck. I said, Mr. X would say that Black history has been distorted. He said, no, cotton patch history. Says Malcolm said, it's cotton patch history. I said, what is he talking about? All we get are the slave ships and the cotton and all that. We weren't taught about the resistance in school. I'm sure a lot of kids, Black kids right now, don't know about the resistance that begins in Africa, even before they got on those boats. When I was at the slave castle in Ghana, they had all the rebellious people, Africans put in a dungeon. And the resistance continues to this day. We weren't taught any of that. We weren't taught about Nat Turner or Gabriel or 100 or so slave revolts. And so that was this. So I went to work in the library where I read James Baldwin because we weren't exposed to any Black authors at the university I attended.
Now, let me ask you a question before you go on with that. I want you to continue that. What were you in the newspaper at 16 for? You mentioned it, but you didn't say what you were for.
I wrote a jazz column and I didn't know anything about it. And I wrote about political subjects and was not so good at it. But when I dropped out of the university and went back to work at the Star, I'd become a good writer by that time. And I took on some of the issues in the that were around in Buffalo at the time. For example, police brutality. I wrote a piece about officers assaulting some Black women. They got this Uncle Tom councilman invite me to his house and tell me, I don't want to call him that, just forget about that. Collaborator, come to his house, and police told him to tell me to back off from this. And I was living in the projects when I dropped out. And these kids were being injured at this intersection. And so I wrote that there should be a stoplight there. And they put one up, you know? I said, wow. And then I debated the future mayor who messed up Buffalo, this guy named James Griffin. While I was living in the projects, we debated. And I said that he was running in a Black district. And the candidate I was supporting, the Black person who was running against him, had already sold out because when this white guy became mayor, he became head of the Parks Department. I was a better writer then. And that paved the way for me to encourage me to go to New York and see if I could succeed as a writer.
Now, was the article that you wrote that was written about you at 16? How did you feel when you first saw the article published?
I felt great. I said, wow, I wrote a jazz piece about Sonny Stitt.
Yes, yes.
He said I was doing Bird before Bird. I liked some of his work. And I tried to play jazz trombone and failed. But recently I've started composing things and I got some CDs out and I just did a CD with some blues veterans out here.
Mm-hmm.
It was all stars, all these guys that did a CDs called Blues Lyrics by Ishmael Reed. And I got David Murray's on there and Ronnie Stewart, who's head of the Blues Society, East Bay Blues Society. I got a couple CDs coming out this year with my compositions. I was always interested in music. And so when I thought about writing a column for the Empire Star, I was going to write about music.
And now, how do you make the transition? You said you dropped out of high school,
Mhm.
but how did you make the transition in terms of getting whatever degree you got in terms of high school and then going on to college?
I finished the night school and I could have graduated my class, but I refused. I had a difficult time. One of the teachers there got really paranoid about me.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote an essay about her, signifying on her. So we had these topics, excuse me, and one of them was a strange profession. And I said that the strange profession was teaching. And I signified on her
Mm-hmm.
because she got really paranoid about me. They called me down to the office and the principal asked me, did I know what all the allusions I was referring to in the essay? And I said, yeah, I know. I didn't know about footnotes, but I knew. So he decided they weren't going to take further steps against me. So the compromise was that I would have to take an English class in a room by myself, like solitary confinement. So I got a degree in my high school degree in night school. And then my grades were so bad in that technical school I went to, it was a waste of time, that I couldn't get in the University of Buffalo. So I went to Millard Fillmore College, which was the night division. Millard Fillmore was a crazy racist and know nothing and signed the fugitive slave law and all that. But he's a hero in Buffalo. And I wrote a short story and people in the English faculty read it and wanted me to get a full scholarship at the daytime university, right? So my stepfather refused to sign the papers.
Hmm.
He didn't sign the papers revealing his assets.
I had somebody on the show earlier who said that same thing happened to her, that she was sent out of Virginia to live in Maryland because Virginia was, they were having some problems in terms of race in
Mhm.
Virginia. So she came and lived with her aunt, and her aunt was just doing it because her father was supporting her. And she got a scholarship for Norfolk State.
Mhm.
And they asked her to take this home so that they could sign off for getting it. And the
Right,
person just
right.
said, "No, I'm not doing that," and letting them know all what I got and what I don't have.
I understood later. I hated him for it. He's always promised to do things and he even follow through. He promised to pay for my education, never came through. But anyway, I finally realized later reading that after the Civil War, blacks signed documents which they hadn't really read. He was semi-literate, and people took advantage of them, took all their assets. So I would trace it to that.
I'm sure that's part of it because
Yeah,
it's part of the culture,
yeah, right,
especially if you couldn't read, then you
right,
don't know what the hell you're signing.
right.
I understand that very much.
He was semi-literate, but he rose to become a leader of the African American the A.M.A.
Mm-hmm.
Zion Church. He became a real figure and leader there
Mm-hmm.
because he was really devoted to the Bible. But he used to have me read these verses of Bible to him, and I wanted to go out and play. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, but he refused to sign those documents. But he's very proud of me that later on, he's very proud of me that I got all these honors and I taught at all these schools without a BA. The school I taught at that I enrolled in, University of Buffalo, where I dropped out, they gave me a PhD and honored me as alumni of the year. And
Congratulations.
the projects I grew up in, where I caused a lot of mischief, the Preservation Society is trying. The argument for saving the projects is because Rick James and I lived there. But this is ironic. If you live long enough, all these things are really surprise you.
It does. It does. And you never know who is looking at you
Mhm,
and
mhm.
for what reason.
Right.
Lesson out of that is be good to everybody.
Mhm.
Because you
Yeah.
never know when they can help you. Now, so you didn't graduate from college?
No.
Okay. You talked about going to New York, I know. And
Yeah.
and that's where we were at. You went to New York. Give me your impression when you first moved to New York, this bigger city than Buffalo, even though it's still New York. What was it, a cultural shock?
I thought it was easier than Buffalo. As a matter of fact, I told my father because when I left, my stepfather, he said, well, "You can't make it in Buffalo. You can't make it anywhere." I mean, New York was, I thought, easier than Buffalo for me because they have this old European attitude about the artists.
Hmm.
Artists get pampered. The artists get pampered in New York, and there are millions upon millions of dollars available for the arts. You don't get that out here. So I was pampered too much. I think that I said if I hadn't left New York in 1967 with a book contract, I would have died of an overdose of affection.
How long were you in New York for
I
before
was
you
there,
moved?
I was there from 62 to 60. Yeah, I left in 1967 for law. I said I wanted to go to the most barbaric place in the country. And so I went to Los Angeles. and,
Now, while you were here in New York, first of all, where did you move to when you got to New York? What area?
I lived in downtown. The rents were very cheap. I paid
Near
60.
Mary Baraka? Because I know he was in the village also.
No, he was not really in the village. He's over in Astor Place.
Oh, okay.
He was on the dividing line between West Village and East Village, but he had very close ties to Allen Ginsberg, and they made him emperor of the Lower East Side. And we never saw him. We hardly ever saw him over there. But he
Hmm.
did say that Umbra, our workshop, was the origin of the Black Arts Movement. So some of the people that were in the workshop at Umbra went uptown with him when he organized the Black Repertory Theater in Harlem. So we had a lot of good writers there. Joe Johnson, for example. Late Joe Johnson was an excellent writer. His cousin was Bumpy Johnson. And
Bumpy.
uh, two different two different personalities. After Umbra Workshop, the first phase of Umbra Workshop broke up, Joe Johnson became a French scholar, man, and got all these prizes in French. Then there was N.H. Pritchard, who's really got a cult now because he's a forerunner of a group called the Language Poets. And Calvin Hurton, who wrote still the most controversial book, Sex and Racism in America,
Hmm.
defaced all over the world.
I read that book
Yep,
a
that was a
long time ago. I read that book.
hot book, man. That was hot. And Calvin knew it's doing selected poetry. It was just published, maybe last year, I think. It was mostly filled with books that I published of his. I published two of his books, which is one thing I learned in New York. I think that's the most important thing I learned in New York, self-publishing or printing. So I published a lot of books by different authors. I'm still publishing books by authors, not only in the United States, but in Africa. And as I told you, we published these two Nigerian volumes, which we sold to the Egyptian Center of Translation, and they were sold in Arabic. That's one thing I learned in New York when we published Umbra, that you could publish, you're not dependent upon big publishers. You can publish your own. My daughter, just Tennessee, got an MA in poetry and then went back to school to learn a trade at Berkeley City College. She published a book. She can publish a book by herself that looks as good as theirs. I told these people at Alfred Knopf, I was in this Zoom thing with Alfred Knopf because they're helping sponsor a new magazine that she's the editor-chief of, or I'm the editor-chief, she's managing editor, Tar Baby, which will be published in spring. It's funded by the Toni Morrison Foundation. And Tony's son, Ford Morrison, is the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
She's putting that book together. She learned how to do that. So we're not really dependent on New York publishers out here. We just feel that it's a racist industry back there. They can only tolerate one at a time. And I think that our foundations, before Columbus Foundation, which does the American Book Awards, which is competitive with the Pulitzer Prizes, only we have a diversity of people, directors
Mm-hmm.
on our board, have broken up this one at a timeism. As a matter of fact, there was an article, a study about the New York Times Book Review where they have one at a time divas and divos. And the problem with that is that there might be writers who are just as gifted, who are obscure from generation to generation. For example, Elizabeth Nunez just died.
Yes, I knew Elizabeth.
She was a terrific writer. And she complained about her treatment till she expired, and even wrote a book about it, Anna in Between, about publishing in New York, which is one of the reasons that I think they probably held that against her, because she gave away the racism and everything in publishing. She was an excellent writer. We honored her. And there are other writers like her, Louise Merriweather. In my opinion, I think Louise Merriweather wrote the best novel about Harlem that I have read. I haven't read every novel. I read Rudolph Fisher and back to the 20s. I read Harlem novels. Her novel, Daddy is a Number Runner, is very subversive in the sense that she covers areas that are not covered by the others. These Black girls have to submit to fondling in order to get food for their family. Now, and that's another ethnic group doing that, right? Some of this other stuff. Now, she was 100 years old when she died. And she had to do a GoFundMe to pay for her medical bills when she got COVID. This is a woman, she'd been honored and gotten all the prizes. So what I learned in New York, living there, is that it's not how well you write, it's the connections that you have. Now, I'm doing the introduction to Terry McMillan's book of short stories right now. She's a student of mine at Cal. I call her the people's choice. because she succeeded without having big connections, which is how you do it. When I first went to New York, somebody told me, a very knowledgeable person, he said, in order for you to succeed, you're going to have to get somebody to take you uptown. Now, I tell you how naive I was, Stephen. I thought that meant that somebody would come down where I'm living, put me on the subway, and take me to some destination. I didn't know it was a metaphor.
Uh-huh.
And that's what happens. You have to have a powerful sponsor in order to become it. Now, she appeared on the bestsellers list with two other Black women authors at one time. And though she wrote as well as they wrote, they had powerful connections. So she made it through the grassroots. In other words, Terry called me and she said, I'm being published. And you think I should rely upon the publisher to promote my books? Or should I just go on and do it myself? I said, no, you can get the publisher to do it. I was wrong. So she went all over the country and told these bookstores that she was in town and blah, blah, blah. And she got a bestseller. So once in a while, somebody will come up from the grassroots. But this is a diva and diva thing. Now they got a couple of them right now, and they got to fight it out. Just like James Baldwin and Richard Wright had to fight it out back there.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a favorite, but I'm not going to say who it is.
I got to meet Terry at Quincy Troop's house
Mhm.
because Margaret has that Harlem salon,
Right, right.
and she had Terry there for a session, and I had gone to that. It's wonderful. It's back in the day when you, particularly in Harlem, you go to people's houses for entertainment like that. A small group of people get together, and
You could sell more books at her salon than in bookstores.
I really enjoyed that particular day. It
Yeah.
was a wonderful day.
She just continued those salons after COVID.
Yes, I know. Unfortunate,
Mhm.
unfortunate, because it actually should have, in my mind, landmark status in Harlem.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it was the best salon since Madam Walker was holding those,
Yes,
the
yes,
tours.
yes. Although I don't know, I've never been to Matter Walker Salon.
I know her granddaughter, Emilia Bundles,
Uh,
and she reclaimed that villa up there. The villa up the Hudson. She renovated it, I guess, and reopened it.
Now, in looking at your resume, you are a cottage industry in terms of so many different things. Essayist. Let me see some of the stuff. I mentioned it in my opening, but
Mhm.
it was where you were doing, even to the point of being a composer and being a jazz pianist,
Mhm. Mhm.
where 2007 was your debut.
Yeah, we did a CD called "For All You Know."
Hmm.
I had a cancer diagnosis, 2007, 2006, something like that. I said I'm not going to exit this planet without playing bebop. I've been studying at the Berkeley Jazz School, but it became now the Berkeley Conservatory or something or other. It's accredited, but I started studying at 50 because I was traveling with these musicians who were doing my songs and poems
Hmm.
through Europe, and we went to Japan. And you're really isolated because the musicians, they get together, all they talk about is music and gigs. And I said, maybe I'll play the piano. And I started studying when I was 50, first under Susan Masarola, and then under the great jazz pianist Mary Watkins, whose opera about Fannie Lou Hamer premiered last month or so in Boston.
Hmm.
Then I said, I'm on my own. And so I work out every day. And I was doing what all the jazz musicians do, improvise on these standards.
Hmm.
And then I decided that that was limiting. Now, what happened was we needed a composer for one of our plays. And these plays are expensive. Very few people attend them, but we train actors who go on to places like Law and Order. And one of our actors got a movie role. And then we have to train other people. But so I composed the music. And there was a group called the Reading Group, which does mostly classical music. They liked the stuff, and they produced a CD with my compositions called The Hands of Grace. And I call it The Hands of Grace because the great young fashion designer, internationally known fashion designer, Grace Wales Bonner, flew me to London, where I performed on the piano backing up her fashion show. And Naomi Campbell was there. I said, man, I can die now. And then I performed at a castle in Italy and in a restaurant in Lagos and at a restaurant in Budapest. But I sat down, I composed something, and I decided when the spirit calls me, that's the only way I can explain it. I can sit down at the piano and just start wandering. Pure improvisation. And so I sent that piece. I wrote a piece recently for Nikki, remembering Nikki, because Nikki Giovanni and I were friends in New York. We all just hang out and go to parties, and people taking our photos together and all this. There's a photo that exists with me, Romare Bearden, Nikki, Larry Neal, and these other people.
Do you know Dr. Randall Maxey?
I don't think so, no.
He's down in Los Angeles. That's why. And the reason why I was bringing that up was because when Nikki Giovanni died, he called me up. He says, "Oh man, I was Nikki Giovanni's first boyfriend."
Mhm, mhm,
And he said, I went to Howard University Medical School,
mhm,
and I was in the bookstore and I saw her book
mhm.
on the shelf. So I called her mother up and said, you better tell Nikki that somebody's using her name. And her mother said, that's her, you fool.
Yeah,
She's famous now.
yep.
Oh, but it's wonderful that we have a tradition of people who have done so many different things. And some
Mhm.
of them, sometimes when it's happening, you don't put any importance on it. You're just doing it because it's something to do. Somebody told you couldn't do it, so that you say, I'm going to do it anyway. And here we are, and looking back 50 years, and you said, wow, that really was the beginning of where I'm at now. But I just didn't understand that was the impetus in terms of it, or that person was my mentor, even though I didn't call him a mentor. I didn't understand
Right,
him to
right.
be a mentor.
Absolutely. I used to go to her house for parties, and we show up. I remember one engagement where we showed up. Berta Mae Grosvenor was performing with Sun Ra. I don't know if you know about our film, Personal Problems.
No, I don't know.
Personal Problems is considered one of the best, a classic film, and it was on the Criterion Collection, and it was shown at the National Gallery. And we starred Berta Mae Grosvenor as an ordinary working class person, and her husband was like a working class couple. And why we were lucky was that we got Bill Gunn, who was too difficult for Hollywood. Matter of fact, the last film he made in Hollywood, this one of these guys stole the money, producer stole the money. It was a big scandal. So he lived up the Hudson with Nina Simone's brother, Sam Waymon. And we started out with a radio series. My partner, Steve Cannon, is very famous. He died, got a lot of coverage in New York papers because he ran an art gallery on Lower
Mhm.
East Side and was friends with David Hammond, the great painter, who helped subsidize his gallery and magazine. And we had a radio show where I said we should do a soap opera. And Terry McMillan and Verta May were actors in the soap opera. And this thing I'm writing now about Terry, I sent all of her performances to the University of Delaware, my archives, and she could have been an actor in Hollywood anytime she desired. Jerry McMillan. And so we decided, I said, well, why don't we do a video version? And we did a video version with a number of actors, Barbara Montgomery and some of the other actors that you
Oh,
would.
Barbara.
She
Barbara.
was in it, and Bill Gunn directed it. Bill Gunn used to hang out with James Dean and Marilyn Monroe and all these people when he was a young man. And it's considered one of the, it was restored. We did it on 3/4 inch primitive tape, and it was restored by Kino Lorber, where you can buy it, Kino Lorber in New York, and made a comeback at the Metrograph Theater and got great reviews. And now it's considered one of the 40 best films shot in New York by New York Magazine. And we did it for $40,000.
Mm.
Okay. And so,
That was cheap.
and when the part was done, I took it to, I went on tour with it, 3/4 inch one. I took it to PBS, and we had a showing of it there. And this producer just put it down, and she put Bill Gunn down, and she put Kathleen Collins as some kind of Hudson River alias thing. And so I was very disappointed. I returned to New York, and fortunately we kept all the tapes for 40 years finally before the revival, right?
Mhm.
So what happened to her? She went and became producer of this pro-Confederate thing that Ken Burns did the Civil Wars.
Mhm.
It's like a sequel to Gone with the Wind. Oh, these Yankees coming down here. We all down here. Here come these old dirty Yankees. That was his point of view. But anyway, that was her piece. And I was so happy that a couple of years ago, the National Gallery showed the film. That's one of the things that's one of the things we produced.
My experience with Barbara, I've known her
Mhm.
for a while, but how I really met her was a friend of mine who used to work for Rainbow Push, and before that, the NAACP. He was in town and he was staying over at Barbara Montgomery's house when she was living on downtown on 42nd Street. And he asked me to come over, met her, and then Rosalind Cash was there.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then they went upstairs to bring down James Earl Jones's father, Robert Jones. And so we all had a great meal and talking and stuff. And it was wonderful being in the presence of history,
Mhm.
different types of history, different types of experiences, because that's what you learn from experience.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm going to give you time to talk about on January 30th in 2025 here in New York. One of your plays opened.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's called the Shine Challenge. The Shine Challenge 2025. And in this play, I resurrect a legend, a key legend in the Black folklore that's fading, that I felt was fading because I talked to Blacks of 3 generations, they hadn't heard about it, which means that this assimilation thing where we all want to be like Donald Trump or somebody, that's what they're insisting upon, share his values or share the values of the New York Times columnists, neocons. That's what they mean by identity problems. We all into identity, right? Because we don't
Mhm.
identify with them. They share their values. That's why we're like outliers in our society. But anyway, it's been very successful that they are some Native American and Hispanic traditions are disappearing because people are assimilating. And so I think that it's very important that we maintain our folklore because they are teaching tools and contain the wisdom of the population of the grassroots. And this story arises out of anonymity, which is what happened to the Odyssey, because Homer, the Odyssey is part of an oral tradition before it was written down. As a matter of fact, some of the Greeks decided that it's very important that these things not be written down. There you go for this literacy orature thing. When the Titanic, the sinking of the Titanic was one of the most important events of the 20th century. And what happened was that there arose a fiction that there was a black man aboard. There was a black person, a Haitian aristocrat connected who was on board with his family, his French family, or his wife was French. But this is a black man who worked in the boiler room. You got first class, second class, third class, all the way down to the bottom, the stokers, who were shoveling coal to make the ship run. And he tells the captain that the ship is sinking. This is a black person as a canary in a coal mine. That could be applied to today.
Mm-hmm.
And the captain doesn't believe it, because this people who built the ship had in mind a 5-star hotel. It was like the fanciest thing afloat. And in first class, you had the Astors and the son of the man who built the Brooklyn wealthy people on first class. So what happens is that, hold on, it's Rome, I'm sorry. What happens is that Shine dives overboard. Nobody's listening to him, so he's swimming toward Harlem, right? They have this scam called Afrofuturism. You go back to Shine, there are 3 different time zones. They do 3 different periods in that rap. People, all these wealthy people, seeing that the ship is sinking, ask him to save them. And they offer money and sex and all kinds of things. And Shine says, and I'll clean it up, get your behind in the water and swim like me. This is a legend that was part of the oral tradition. Langston Hughes wrote it down in 1965. And from the 35 lines, I've expanded these lines into a 99-page script, fleshing out all the issues, like the manufacture of the ship and kind of people who are aboard and the history of the captain's shipping experience. He had a lot of mishaps and all kind of different angles that are suggested by the poem. Now, these young people, these young'uns, right, they believe that hip hop originated in 1980s in the Bronx. No, it originates earlier than that with the toast, 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 plural, that arose from the gangster world and which have circulated the prisons and other places. All they did was add audio equipment. And that's how you got hip hop. But it didn't originate in the 1980s. It originated earlier than that. I studied Yoruba, the language that most blacks spoke when they came to this country, and it probably has West African roots.
They've been rapping for a long time. As you just said, way beyond the 1980s.
Absolutely.
Way beyond the 1980s.
It's got the rhymes, it's got the boasting, it's got all the ingredients of rap, this piece.
Okay, tell folks where it's going to be at and the date.
It's going to start January 30th, and it's going to run until February 16th. Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays at 8 o'clock. Sunday matinees at 3 p.m. And information is at .net. Now, the theater, they got on me about this. So theater is spelled Theater, Theater. So it's theaterforthenewcity.net. I call it the Shine Challenge because, the hoofers improve their skills through challenge.
That movie with Sammy Davis Jr. and Gregory Hines. Challenge!
Yeah. Because I want some writers in the future generation to expand upon what I've done. This is not forgotten. Black culture, Hispanic culture, Native American culture are under assault. That's why they elected this guy. And the people surrounding him, the billionaires, the high-tech people, first of all, they believe that Black people are intellectually inferior. That's what Elon Musk said. I don't know how people missed that, but the NAACP got on him about that. He said that black people have a low IQ. That's what he was going along with. And I think what he wants to do, Elon Musk, is to make the United States the apartheid government in exile, the South African apartheid government in exile. I think that's his ambition. And he's got this guy who wants to play golf, carrying out his wishes. So what we have to do is, now I learned this from Native Americans. Carl and I are members of the honorary members of the Tlingit group in Alaska. We've been up there a number of times. I don't know if you saw the commercial on that one of these series of commercials about elderly on television where the grandfather's tied up and the kids running around him. Yeah,
I don't remember it.
in this country, there are a bunch of where elderly people are unpaid babysitters. That's their role. That's not how elderly people are treated in other societies that I've visited, especially in Africa. I got told because they didn't think that Cyprian, the great Nigerian writer, they thought I insulted him. Of course, we became friends. But they say, we do not talk to the elderly over here like that. Now, these kids around here, they say, I'll say, if you want the lemons, or I'll give, go, they tell me, yeah, cuss me out. These little kids around here. In Alaska, among the Native Americans, the elderly people are tradition bearers. They're the ones who keep the stories alive. And I think that that's a role that a lot of us could take.
And that we should take every day. And again, as I started off at the very beginning, part of putting up this particular podcast YouTube was number one, I started it during the pandemic because I ain't had nothing else to do. But more importantly, the major reason was to serve as information for people right now, but also as an archive for people in the future
Of course.
can look back on and hear in their own words what folks was talking about during this particular period of time and how it affects them in the future.
See, the big tragedy of the 20th century was the collapse of the black press.
Yes, yes. And
Because,
I used to write for the Amsterdam.
yeah, I'd made all these mainstream magazines and stuff, but my mother didn't believe I was up to anything until she read me in Ebony magazines. You mean Ebony?
You have arrived then.
See, I think if we had the black press, a lot of these knuckleheads who voted for Trump because they wouldn't vote for a woman, and especially some of the rappers who were disgraceful, who backed Trump, Lil Pump and Lil Wayne and all, and they have millions of followers. I think if they had been informed, if there'd been Chicago Defender or Pittsburgh Courier or these great enterprise, the black press is so subversive to the government that they wanted to charge the publishers with sedition. There's a book called The Question of Sedition, where they wanted to charge because some of them were pro-Japanese.
This was a wonderful time. I do thank you. It took us a little while to get it together.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But we got it together, and I am so appreciative of both you and Rome for immediately suggesting it, and I'm just tickled pink. I just,
Rome is a miracle. Miracle man. He works miracles on the stage. Rome with very little.
And I have gone to many of his productions or the banana pudding.
Right. Rome is keeping our jazz alive in New York.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
Jazz on the skids in that town.
Yeah. So that's it for the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. Thank you for joining, and we'll be back with you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in this week. Hope you enjoyed this show about stuff. See you next time.